The Carr family, living in the serene town of Alturas, Florida, appeared to lead a picture-perfect life. Known for their strong faith, they attended church regularly, embodying the image of a close-knit, peaceful family. Their small-town life was free from turmoil, until one fateful day in the summer of 1988. On June 14th, 16-year-old Dwayne Carr discovered a disturbing letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note contained a chilling ultimatum, demanding the family leave Florida or face deadly consequences. Shaken by the stark threat, Dwayne rushed to his parents. His mother, Peggy, was immediately gripped by fear, while her husband, Pern, dismissed it as a cruel prank. Despite the outward dismissal, unease settled over the family. As the seasons shifted from summer to fall, what began as a seemingly harmless letter would soon unravel into a series of terrifying events, forever changing the Carr family's lives. On October 23rd, the Carr family's seemingly peaceful life took a dark turn when Peggy Carr suddenly fell ill. It began with severe nausea and excruciating pain that left her incapacitated. Pern, her husband, brushed off her symptoms as nothing more than a passing sickness, convinced it would resolve on its own. However, Peggy's condition only worsened. Her hair started falling out in clumps, a distressing sign that something was seriously wrong. Within a week, her teenage son, Dwayne, began experiencing the same debilitating symptoms, leading the family to suspect that this was no ordinary illness. As panic set in, authorities launched an investigation into their mysterious ailment. On December 2nd, the shocking truth was revealed. The entire family had dangerously high levels of thallium in their bodies, a lethal poison commonly found in rat poison, confirming that they were being systematically targeted in a deadly and calculated attack. The discovery of thallium poisoning within the Carr family shook the small, close-knit community of Alturas, Florida, to its core. The tranquil town, where most families left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors, suddenly found itself gripped by fear. The realization that someone was deliberately poisoning a family left residents in shock and disbelief. And soon, everyone was wondering if they too could be potential targets. With no immediate answers about how the thallium entered the Carr household, unease spread like wildfire, leading to rampant speculation and heightened vigilance among the townspeople. Authorities moved swiftly to unravel the mystery behind the Carr family's symptoms. With all fingers pointing to thallium poisoning, the police conducted a comprehensive search of the Carr residence. Every corner of the home was inspected, from food storage areas to cleaning supplies, in hopes of finding any source that could have contaminated their food or drink. Household items were bagged and sent to labs for analysis, and even the dust in the house was collected, as it might have carried traces of the poison. Despite the extensive effort, the home inspection failed to yield any conclusive evidence as to how thallium had entered the family's bodies. Peggy Carr worked as a waitress at a local diner, so investigators shifted their attention there next. Police scoured the diner where Peggy spent her days, analyzing the food and beverages served to the public and closely examining the kitchen for any possible contamination. Even the utensils, plates, and the area where Peggy prepared orders were scrutinized. Yet again, their efforts came up empty. No trace of thallium was found at the diner, and none of Peggy's co-workers exhibited symptoms of poisoning, suggesting that the contamination was not related to her workplace. Simultaneously, authorities considered the possibility that the family might have been poisoned through a communal source, such as water. Alturas' water supply was examined thoroughly, from the local wells to the town's main water lines. Water samples were collected and tested to ensure there were no toxins present, and nearby farms, orange groves, and other potential sources of water contamination were also investigated. However, no traces of thallium were detected in the water supply, ruling out the possibility that the poisoning had occurred through this route. As days passed, the sense of panic in the community intensified. Families began to question the safety of their own homes, and some even stopped drinking tap water or eating at local establishments. The lack of concrete answers from law enforcement only fueled the fear that the threat could be far-reaching and indiscriminate. People started to fear that thallium might be lurking in their everyday lives, and rumors swirled as to who might be responsible for such a heinous crime. A breakthrough in the investigation came when police discovered several unopened bottles of Coca-Cola in the Carr household. At first glance, these bottles seemed like any other Coke bottles purchased from a store, perfectly sealed and unassuming. However, given the family's symptoms, investigators decided to test the contents of these bottles. The results were nothing short of shocking. Each bottle contained enough thallium to kill an adult, pointing to a deliberate and calculated attempt to poison the Carr family. The discovery of thallium-laced Coke bottles sent shockwaves through Alturas and beyond. Coca-Cola was, and still is, one of the most widely consumed soft drinks in the world. And the idea that an everyday household product could be tampered with to carry a lethal poison caused widespread alarm. News of the discovery spread quickly, and locals began to question the safety of their food and beverages. The potential for a larger-scale product tampering situation became a real fear, with many wondering if more Coke bottles or other products might be contaminated with the deadly poison. Store shelves were quickly checked for signs of tampering, and some people chose to stop buying or drinking Coke altogether until the situation was resolved. The investigation took a new turn, with police and Coca-Cola working closely to determine if there was a broader issue with the company's products. They needed to find out whether the contamination had occurred during the bottling process or whether the Coke bottles had been tampered with after leaving the factory. If the former were true, it could mean that thousands or even millions of other bottles could be tainted, posing a risk to consumers across the state or country. If it were a case of localized tampering, then it pointed to someone deliberately targeting the Carr family in particular. Coca-Cola cooperated fully with the investigation, providing access to their facilities and assisting in the testing of products from their distribution lines. After extensive testing and quality control checks, it became evident that the contamination had not occurred at the factory level. The Coke plant and its bottling process were found to be secure, and it was ruled out that any large-scale tampering had taken place at the manufacturing stage. This conclusion shifted the focus back to the Carr family and their immediate surroundings. The police now believed that the poisoning of the Coke bottles was a deliberate, targeted attack against the Carr family, rather than a random act of product tampering. This new line of investigation led them to consider individuals who may have had a motive to harm the family. Every person who had interacted with the Carrs or had access to their home was scrutinized, and the search for the perpetrator turned more personal. Neighbors, acquaintances, and even family members were considered as possible suspects in what had become a calculated and cold-blooded attempt to murder an entire family. As law enforcement continued to dig deeper, the case only grew more complicated, revealing the dark and twisted motives behind the poisoning, and ultimately pointing to a suspect whose actions shocked even the seasoned investigators working the case. As the investigation progressed, police started narrowing down the possibilities, shifting from a community-wide concern to a more personal and targeted attack. Given the deliberate contamination of the Coke bottles found in the Carr household, detectives theorized that someone close to the family was likely responsible for the poisoning. With this in mind, they began scrutinizing those with direct access to the Carr home and the most potential motive to cause harm. Pern Carr, Peggy's husband, quickly came under suspicion. The timeline of events and his behavior raised numerous red flags. When Peggy first fell ill, Pern seemed unusually dismissive of her symptoms, treating them as if they were minor and refusing to take her to the hospital even as her condition worsened. Investigators found it strange that Pern would be unconcerned, particularly as Peggy's health rapidly declined and more family members began showing symptoms. Additionally, the timing of the poisoning seemed to coincide suspiciously with periods when Pern was away from home, casting doubt on his possible involvement or knowledge of the events. A critical piece of evidence emerged in the form of an anonymous threatening letter that had been delivered to the Carr family months before Peggy fell ill. The letter, typewritten and unsigned, warned that if the family didn't leave Florida within 2 weeks, they would face death. At the time, the Carrs brushed it off as a cruel prank, but the resurfacing of this ominous warning made it appear as though it was a harbinger of the poisoning to come. Pern's dismissive attitude toward the letter also raised suspicions. Detectives began to wonder if he knew more than he let on. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered other disturbing incidents. 2 of the Carr family's dogs had died suddenly in years prior, both exhibiting symptoms similar to those of thallium poisoning. These events hinted at a pattern of systematic poisoning attempts, suggesting that whoever was responsible may have been testing the lethal chemical long before targeting the Carr family members. The situation for the Carr family reached a devastating turning point as the severity of their condition became more apparent. With suspicion of deliberate poisoning, authorities had the entire family tested for thallium exposure. The results were staggering. Every member of the household had traces of the deadly chemical in their system, including Pern. This revelation cleared Pern as a suspect. It seemed implausible that someone would knowingly poison themselves and their children to such an extent. The thallium in Pern's system indicated that he too was a victim of the same deadly attack that afflicted the rest of his family. While the police worked tirelessly to uncover the perpetrator, Peggy's health continued to deteriorate. Her symptoms, initially misdiagnosed as a passing illness, worsened to the point where she could no longer communicate or function. Peggy fell into a coma, and despite medical efforts to save her, her condition was beyond recovery. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of agonizing illness, the family was faced with the heart-wrenching decision to remove Peggy from life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving her family devastated and grieving a tragic loss that had come so suddenly and inexplicably. The investigation, which had until that point focused on poisoning, now took on a new and more urgent tone. It was a murder case. The deliberate and fatal poisoning of Peggy Carr transformed the situation from an act of attempted harm to an act of calculated murder. With Peggy's passing, law enforcement intensified their efforts, driven by the need to bring the person responsible for this heinous crime to justice and prevent any further attacks on the remaining family members. With the tragic death of Peggy Carr, the investigation shifted focus, aiming to identify who could have been targeting the Carr family so deliberately. Detectives began looking closer at those who lived nearby, narrowing in on George Trapal and his wife, Diana, the Carrs' closest neighbors. The couple stood out almost immediately, and as police learned more about them, Trapal quickly rose to the top of their suspect list. A self-taught chemist, Trapal had a deep understanding of chemistry and access to the knowledge required to poison someone with a rare substance like thallium. What heightened suspicion further was Trapal's criminal background. He had previously been involved in illegal activities, including a prison stint for acting as a chemist in a methamphetamine manufacturing operation. This knowledge of chemicals made Trapal a prime suspect in the mysterious poisoning of the Carr family. Investigators uncovered a connection between Trapal's expertise and the symptoms the Carr family had experienced. Thallium, tasteless and odorless, is an ideal poison for someone with Trapal's background, and the methodical way in which it was administered suggested a perpetrator who was not only scientifically knowledgeable, but also highly calculated. Detectives theorized that someone with Trapal's level of chemical expertise could have easily tampered with the Coke bottles and carefully planned the slow, lethal poisoning. Adding to their suspicion, police uncovered a history of tension between Trapal and the Carr family. The two families had previously argued over noise complaints, with Trapal expressing anger and disdain for the Carrs. This animosity, combined with Trapal's specific chemical knowledge and a criminal history tied to toxic substances, painted a picture of someone who may have had the motive, means, and opportunity to carry out the poisoning. The investigation quickly closed in on Trapal as the prime suspect, setting the stage for a deeper probe into his activities and potential role in the deadly attack on the Carr family. With George Trapal as the prime suspect in the poisoning of the Carr family, law enforcement realized they needed more than circumstantial evidence to make a case against him. Trapal was intelligent, methodical, and unlikely to confess under standard interrogation. Recognizing that traditional approaches would not work, the FBI devised a bold strategy, an undercover operation to get closer to Trapal and gather the necessary evidence to tie him directly to the crime. Special Agent Susan Goreck was selected for this dangerous mission, given her expertise and ability to blend into difficult situations. Agent Goreck adopted a new persona, Sherry Gwynn, a vulnerable woman on the brink of divorce from an abusive husband. Under this guise, she sought to ingratiate herself with Trapal by infiltrating his social circle, which was known to gather for elaborate murder mystery events. Trapal and his wife Diana hosted one such gathering, a perfect opportunity for Goreck to get close to the suspect. The event, held in April 1989, was no ordinary party. It was a carefully crafted murder mystery weekend where guests were invited to solve murders based on clues provided by the hosts. This theme seemed disturbingly relevant to the case at hand and provided a unique window into Trapal's mindset. Goreck's role at the gathering was challenging. She had to interact closely with Trapal, without arousing his suspicion, all while carefully observing his behavior and comments. Throughout the weekend, Trapal seemed unbothered by the presence of a new face and even appeared to warm to Sherry Gwynn. As Goreck participated in the murder mystery scenarios, she noticed that several aspects of the event bore eerie similarities to the poisoning of the Carr family. For example, one of the murder plots involved poisoning, specifically mentioning a substance that mirrored the characteristics of thallium: odorless, tasteless, and difficult to detect. In addition, a pamphlet distributed to the guests contained a peculiar passage. When a death threat appears on your doorstep, prudent people throw out all their food and watch what they eat. The language closely resembled the threatening letter the Carr family had received prior to the poisoning, further linking Trapal to the crime. Goreck's weekend with Trapal allowed her to build rapport and set the groundwork for future interactions. She continued to engage him in conversation, subtly probing for details that might reveal more about his involvement in the Carr case. The more she interacted with Trapal, the more convinced Goreck became that he was not only capable of such a crime, but that he relished the intellectual challenge of carrying it out. The event gave her crucial insights into his personality, a cold, calculating individual who took pleasure in the idea of outsmarting others, fitting the profile of someone who would commit such a methodical and hidden crime as poisoning. Agent Goreck's brave undercover work planted her firmly in Trapal's circle, allowing her to gather crucial information and piece together the mindset and behaviors of a man who, all signs indicated, had executed a deadly attack on his neighbors. However, she knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much to do to build a case strong enough to ensure that Trapal would face justice for his actions. After the initial weekend with George Trapal, Agent Susan Goreck knew that one interaction wouldn't be enough to build a case against him. Trapal was highly intelligent, careful, and unlikely to make a careless mistake that would easily incriminate him. Therefore, Goreck, under her assumed identity as Sherry Gwynn, continued to work her way into Trapal's life, gradually building rapport and gaining his trust. Over the next several months, she orchestrated multiple meetings with Trapal, carefully listening to every word and observing his reactions for any clues that could tie him to the poisoning of the Carr family. Goreck played her role perfectly, presenting herself as a sympathetic figure who was struggling in her personal life, someone who could relate to Trapal on a personal level. This vulnerability allowed Trapal to let his guard down. During their interactions, Goreck sought to understand his mindset and, most importantly, gather any piece of evidence that could connect him to the thallium poisoning. Every conversation was meticulously recorded, and every meeting was conducted with careful planning to ensure both Goreck's safety and the integrity of the investigation. However, the pressure was mounting on the investigators. While Goreck was making headway and getting close to Trapal, the clock was ticking. They needed conclusive proof to arrest Trapal and bring justice for the Carr family. Simply uncovering Trapal's suspicious behavior was not enough. They needed direct evidence that could be used in court to prove he had deliberately poisoned the family. As months went by, Goreck found herself facing the challenge of deepening her relationship with Trapal without revealing her true identity, all while ensuring that she didn't alert him to the ongoing investigation. A significant breakthrough came when Goreck, continuing to build on her fake persona, convinced Trapal to show her around his home. Under the guise of a friend seeking advice, she managed to gain access to the place where the police suspected he may have conducted the poisoning preparations. Inside the house, Goreck took careful note of everything she saw: items, possible lab equipment, and suspicious chemicals, looking for anything that could link Trapal to thallium. The visit allowed her to see firsthand the environment Trapal lived in and to gather valuable details for the investigation team. While in Trapal's home, Goreck was careful not to touch anything or appear too interested, maintaining her cover as a friend rather than an investigator. She noticed several peculiar features about the home, such as a secret passageway in the library and areas that seemed to be well hidden or locked away, possibly harboring critical evidence. This visit laid the groundwork for what law enforcement hoped would be the final piece of the puzzle. If they could secure a search warrant, they might find conclusive proof that Trapal was the one who poisoned the Carr family. Goreck's undercover efforts had opened the door to Trapal's private world, bringing the investigation closer to exposing the truth behind the mysterious thallium poisoning. However, the stakes were high. and any misstep could compromise months of hard work and, potentially, Goreck's safety. The pressure to find the crucial evidence necessary for a conviction weighed heavily on the team as the search for proof of Trapal's involvement in the poisoning intensified. The undercover operation led by Agent Susan Goreck was slowly unraveling the mystery behind the Carr family's poisoning. While Goreck continued to build a connection with George Trapal, law enforcement strategized on how to obtain a search warrant for Trapal's property, which they believed held the key to solving the case. Eventually, their meticulous work paid off, and they secured a warrant to search Trapal's home and garage, aiming to find any direct evidence of thallium or poisoning equipment. When the search finally took place, investigators meticulously combed through Trapal's garage, and their persistence was rewarded with a critical discovery, a vial labeled thallium nitrate. This compound was an exact match to the poison that had been found in the Carr family's bodies, confirming that they had found the source of the lethal chemical that caused the deaths and illnesses in the Carr household. The presence of the vial in Trapal's possession was a damning piece of evidence. It directly linked him to the thallium poisoning, leaving little doubt that he was responsible for targeting the family. The discovery of the thallium nitrate was the breakthrough the investigation desperately needed. Armed with this conclusive evidence, law enforcement moved quickly to arrest Trapal, marking a pivotal turning point in the case. On April 5, 1990, Trapal was taken into custody at his home, facing charges for the murder of Peggy Carr and the attempted poisoning of her entire family. As the police led Trapal away, it became clear that the calculated, methodical poisoning plot had finally been uncovered. Trapal's arrest sent shockwaves through the community and provided some closure to the Carr family, who had suffered months of fear and uncertainty. The vial of thallium nitrate found in his garage became a key piece of evidence in building the case against him, solidifying the fact that Trapal had carried out a deliberate and targeted attack on his unsuspecting neighbors. The investigation had finally connected the dots, and the man responsible for the horrific crime was now facing justice. The trial of George Trapal, which began in January 1991, brought to light the disturbing extent of his involvement in the poisoning of the Carr family. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence that painted a chilling picture of Trapal as a cold, calculating killer. Among the most crucial pieces of evidence was the thallium nitrate found in Trapal's garage, directly linking him to the poison that killed Peggy Carr and poisoned her family. Additionally, they introduced tampered Coca-Cola bottles from the Carr household, which Trapal had meticulously contaminated with the lethal chemical, making it clear that his goal was to kill multiple members of the family. Perhaps even more damning were the documents found during the search of Trapal's home. Investigators had uncovered journals and guides Trapal had written, detailing different types of poisons and their effects on the human body. One guide, titled General Poisoning Guides, explicitly mentioned thallium as a particularly effective poison. The prosecution argued that Trapal's extensive knowledge of chemistry and his focus on poisons demonstrated a premeditated plan to murder the Carr family. Additionally, the journals contained references to eliminating undesirable neighbors, solidifying his motive for carrying out the poisoning. Throughout the trial, Trapal sat emotionless and unfazed, exhibiting a disturbing lack of remorse for his actions. He maintained a cold and calculated demeanor, almost as if he were a spectator at an intellectual game rather than a man accused of murder. Witnesses testified to Trapal's disdain for the Carr family and his interest in chemistry and poisons, reinforcing the argument that he had meticulously planned the attack. The prosecution's portrayal of Trapal as a highly intelligent individual who saw himself as superior to others struck a chord with the jury, who saw the entire case as an act of pure malice and disregard for human life. It did not take long for the jury to reach a verdict. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with a unanimous decision. George Trapal was found guilty on all counts, including the murder of Peggy Carr and the attempted poisoning of her family. The judge sentenced Trapal to death, declaring that his actions were not only premeditated, but also particularly heinous and cruel. With those words, Trapal faced the gravest consequence for his actions: execution for his crimes. The trial's swift conclusion brought a sense of justice to the Carr family and the community of Alturas. Trapal's conviction and death sentence marked the end of a long, painstaking investigation that had unraveled the shocking details of his deadly plot. For law enforcement, The conviction was a testament to their relentless pursuit of the truth. And for the Carr family, it was a bittersweet victory as they finally saw the man responsible for their suffering held accountable for his horrendous actions. The conviction and sentencing of George Trapal marked the culmination of a painstaking investigation, and at the heart of it was the dedication and bravery of Special Agent Susan Goreck. Her undercover work was instrumental in bringing Trapal to justice, requiring not only careful planning, but also immense courage and perseverance. Goreck's willingness to go deep undercover, build a relationship with Trapal, and risk her life was a pivotal factor in uncovering the truth behind the poisoning of the Carr family. AI Agent Goreck, under the guise of Sherry Gwynn, entered the world of a calculating murderer, meticulously gaining his trust, while constantly aware that any misstep could have exposed her true identity and put her in grave danger. Trapal was highly intelligent with a sharp eye for detail and could easily have detected any inconsistencies in Goreck's story or behavior. The risks were real. If Trapal had suspected that Goreck was working for law enforcement, he may have acted swiftly and violently to protect his secrets, potentially making Goreck his next victim. Despite the risks, Goreck's resolve to bring justice for Peggy Carr and her family never wavered. Her patient and careful infiltration into Trapal's life provided critical insights and evidence that would eventually lead to the discovery of the thallium nitrate vial in his garage, key to securing a conviction. Her undercover work allowed the investigation to gather the necessary proof of Trapal's guilt without alerting him to the growing case against him. In the aftermath of the trial, Goreck's bravery was celebrated not just by law enforcement, but also by the Carr family, who expressed deep gratitude for her relentless pursuit of justice. Her courage and selflessness in confronting a cunning and dangerous criminal were instrumental in ensuring that Trapal faced the consequences of his heinous actions, bringing closure to a case that had terrorized an innocent family and their community. In the aftermath of George Trapal's arrest and conviction, the Carr family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Though the surviving members eventually recovered physically from the thallium poisoning, the emotional scars ran deep, and the trauma from Peggy Carr's death cast a long shadow over their lives. The loss of Peggy, who was a devoted mother and wife, was an immeasurable tragedy that could not be undone by the sentencing of her killer. The family had faced months of suffering and fear, and now they were left to grapple with grief, anger, and a sense of injustice. Dwayne Carr, Peggy's 16-year-old son, was hit particularly hard. Having witnessed his mother's health deteriorate over months and experiencing the poisoning himself, Dwayne struggled with the overwhelming pain of losing her in such a cruel and senseless way. The grief, compounded by the trauma of the poisoning and the stress of the trial, led to emotional struggles that he battled for years. He often expressed his sorrow through anger and outbursts, struggling to find a way to process the life-altering loss he experienced at such a young age. In time, Dwayne found a way to cope by writing letters to his late mother. In these heartfelt letters, he poured out his emotions, expressing his love for her and his sorrow over her death. The letters became a source of solace, a way for him to connect with Peggy, even though she was no longer there. In one poignant letter, Dwayne wrote, "Dear Mom, this is your baby boy. I'd like to tell you that I love you, and I'm sorry for all the bad things I've ever done to you. Hopefully, you're in a better place." The loss of Peggy forever changed the Carr family, but they sought to honor her memory by finding strength in one another and continuing their lives with the love and resilience that Peggy had shown throughout her life. Though they would never fully heal from the tragedy, the conviction of Trapal provided some closure, allowing them to begin the long journey of moving forward. As the case of the Carr family draws to a close, we are reminded of the incredible bravery of law enforcement officers, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the strength of those who endure unimaginable tragedy. The conviction of George Trapal brought some measure of peace to the Carr family, and the tireless work of Agent Susan Goreck and her team ensured that a dangerous criminal faced the consequences of his actions. While nothing could bring back Peggy Carr, her story remains a powerful testament to the impact of courage and determination. If you're captivated by stories like this one and want to dive deeper into true crime cases from around the world, we have more gripping content for you. Be sure to check out our new channel, where we explore the most shocking and compelling true crime stories across Latin America. From unsolved mysteries to infamous cases, We bring you detailed accounts of crimes that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations and stay tuned for our next story.